Warning, listen closely, because this is not motivation, this is a revelation. The moment you understand what I'm about to say, you will realize that your life has never been controlled by luck, effort, or outside forces, but by the quiet sentences you repeat to yourself every single day. What you consistently whisper inwardly becomes the loudest command the world obeys. You don't move toward money, money moves toward the version of you that expects it. And here is the unsettling truth most people never face: you are already repeating something right now, and it is already producing results. The question is not if repetition works, the question is what you are repeating. Because the instant your inner words shift from wishing to assuming, from hoping to knowing, reality begins to reorganize without struggle, without force, and without delay. This is the moment where awareness becomes power. And once you see it, there is no turning back. Repetition creates reality. Why what you keep saying becomes what you keep living. Repetition is not a habit of speech, it is a declaration of identity. And identity is the only doorway through which reality enters your life. Every visible circumstance you call fate, luck, or coincidence is nothing more than the echo of something you have repeatedly accepted as true within yourself. Long before money appears in your hand, it appears as a sentence you quietly agree with again and again. People misunderstand repetition because they think it is about forcing words, when in truth it is about conditioning belief. The mind does not argue with what it hears often, it accepts it. And once accepted, it must be expressed. This is why repetition is the most underestimated creative power you possess. A single thought passes unnoticed, but a thought repeated becomes familiar, and familiarity hardens into fact. You do not need to shout affirmations or convince yourself emotionally. You only need to return to the same inner conclusion so often that it begins to feel normal. Normality is the secret sign that creation has already begun. When something feels normal, the mind no longer resists it, and the world cannot resist reflecting it. Most people repeat lack without realizing it. Small phrases like, "It's hard," "not yet," "maybe someday," or "money doesn't last." These sentences are not harmless, they are rehearsals. And whatever you rehearse inwardly, life performs outwardly. Repetition is rehearsal for reality. This is why effort without inner discipline produces little change. You can work endlessly, but if your inner speech repeats struggle, life must continue giving you reasons to struggle. The world is not reacting to your actions, it is responding to your assumptions. When you begin to repeat a new inner statement that implies abundance, ease, and flow, something subtle happens: resistance fades. At first, nothing outside moves, but something inside settles. You stop chasing proof. You stop needing signs. That inner stillness is not inactivity, it is alignment. Repetition works not because you are trying to make something happen, but because you are allowing yourself to accept that it already is. And once accepted, it must appear. The law is impersonal and exact. It does not judge whether your repetition is positive or negative, it only mirrors it. If you repeat fear, life delivers caution. If you repeat confidence, life delivers opportunity. If you repeat abundance, money finds pathways you could not have planned. This is why persistence matters more than intensity. Intensity fades, repetition remains. A calm assumption repeated daily is more powerful than emotional excitement practiced once. The mind yields to what is steady. Think of repetition as carving a groove. Each return deepens the path until thought naturally flows there without effort. When your inner dialogue consistently implies that money comes to you easily and repeatedly, you are no longer wishing for wealth, you are occupying the state of someone for whom wealth is natural. And the world must treat you accordingly. This is not mystical, it is psychological law expressed through life. Circumstances do not create beliefs, beliefs create circumstances. Repetition is how beliefs are formed. This is why people stay trapped in cycles for years, not because change is hard, but because they keep repeating the same story about themselves. Change begins the moment you interrupt the old repetition and install a new one. You do not fight the old story, you starve it by no longer repeating it. Attention is fuel. What you repeat, you feed. What you ignore dissolves. As you persist, outer evidence will begin to appear in small, almost casual ways: a message, a refund, a chance meeting, an unexpected opening. These are not accidents, they are confirmations that the inner shift has been accepted. But here is where most people fail: they treat repetition as a technique instead of a lifestyle. They repeat until they see results, then stop. When they stop, the old story slowly returns, and with it the old conditions. True repetition is loyalty to a new inner truth, even after it starts working. Especially after it starts working. That loyalty turns temporary success into permanent change. Repetition is how you remain the person who receives, not just the person who once received. Understand this deeply. The world is always listening, but it only hears what you say consistently. A desire whispered once is ignored. An assumption repeated becomes law. Money does not respond to need, it responds to expectation. An expectation is built through repetition. When you master this, you stop asking when things will change. You know they must, because the inner cause has already been set. And once the cause is set and repeated, the effect has no choice but to follow. Inner assumption is the only cause why money obeys the state you live in. Everything you experience is born from an assumption you are living from, not a circumstance you are reacting to. And this single realization dissolves the struggle that most people mistakenly accept as normal. An assumption is not a wish, not a hope, and not a dream. It is a quiet decision about what is true. The moment you assume something to be so, your mind stops questioning it, and life begins arranging itself to confirm it. This is why two people can face the same situation and receive completely different outcomes. They are not seeing different worlds, they are occupying different inner states. Money, like every other experience, does not come to effort. It comes to alignment. It flows toward the state you repeatedly occupy within yourself. When your inner assumption is, money is difficult, life must prove that assumption correct. When your inner assumption is, money comes easily and repeatedly, life must demonstrate that as well. The world has no creative power of its own. It is a responder, a mirror, a faithful servant to the inner stance you hold. Most people unknowingly live from borrowed assumptions, things they heard growing up, things society repeats, things reinforced by past failures. They never question them, yet these assumptions quietly run their financial lives. An assumption, once accepted, does not require constant thought. It operates automatically. That is both the danger and the power. If your assumption is lack, you don't need to think about lack for it to continue appearing. It has already been installed. This is why changing circumstances without changing assumptions produces temporary relief at best. Money gained without a shift in inner state disappears just as easily, because the old assumption eventually reasserts itself. Lasting change always begins inwardly. When you deliberately choose a new assumption, you are not pretending, you are selecting a new cause. And causes always precede effects. The inner world moves first, the outer world follows. This is law, not philosophy. What you assume yourself to be determines what you are allowed to experience. When you assume abundance, you begin to think, decide, and act differently without effort. Opportunities appear because you notice them. People respond differently because you expect them to. Doors open because you unconsciously walk toward them instead of away from them. None of this feels forced. That is how you know the assumption is working. Force belongs to doubt. Ease belongs to belief. The most powerful assumptions are not emotional, they are natural. They feel ordinary, they feel obvious. When money becomes part of your assumed reality, you stop obsessing over it. And paradoxically, that is when it starts showing up more consistently. Obsession signals absence, assumption signals presence. This is why desperation repels and calm confidence attracts. The inner state always broadcasts its expectation. Money responds to certainty, not pleading. You do not have to visualize endlessly or repeat words mechanically. You only need to live from the conclusion that it is already handled. That inner conclusion becomes your home, and life always furnishes the home you choose to live in. Most people attempt to change their world by changing their actions alone. They hustle, grind, and push, yet carry the same inner identity of struggle. The result is exhaustion with little reward. Action without assumption is effortful and inconsistent. Action that flows from assumption is inspired and effective. When you assume success, you naturally take the right steps at the right time without overthinking. You are guided, not strained. Money obeys this inner law because money is not a thing, it is a relationship. And relationships are governed by expectations. How you expect money to treat you is how it treats you. If you expect it to come and go unpredictably, it will. If you expect it to support and multiply, it will find ways to do so. This is not superstition, it is coherence. Your inner belief and outer experience must match. Life cannot contradict your deepest assumption for long. If there is a contradiction, the assumption eventually wins. This is why temporary setbacks do not matter when your inner state is stable. A delay does not shake you because your assumption is not dependent on timing. You know the outcome is inevitable. And inevitability is the most magnetic state of all. When you live from inevitability, you stop asking how. The how belongs to the outer world. The what is true belongs to you. Once you decide what is true internally, the external world organizes the details. People often ask, how long will it take? That question itself reveals the assumption of waiting. When you shift into the assumption of already having, time loses its power over you. Things arrive in their own rhythm, often faster than logic would predict. Money begins to show up in ordinary ways that feel almost anticlimactic, yet consistent. And consistency is the true sign of a changed state. The warning here is subtle but important. Do not use assumption as a technique to get money. That keeps money outside of you. Use assumption to become the person for whom money is normal. When you do that, money is no longer a goal, it is a byproduct. The outer world has no choice but to obey the inner cause. It always has, it always will. Feeling gives words power. Why calm certainty outperforms forced emotion. Words by themselves do nothing. It is the feeling that seals them into reality. And feeling does not mean excitement, intensity, or emotional highs, it means acceptance. The greatest misunderstanding about inner speech is the belief that you must feel overly positive, energized, or emotionally charged for it to work. In truth, emotion can fluctuate, but feeling as knowing is stable. Feeling is the quiet sense that something is already settled. When you repeat words without this inner acceptance, they remain sounds. When you repeat words with the feeling of certainty, they become commands. Life does not respond to what you say, it responds to what you believe while saying it. This is why frantic affirmations often fail. They are powered by need, and need implies absence. Absence cannot produce presence. Calm certainty, on the other hand, implies fulfillment, and fulfillment is creative. Feeling is the atmosphere in which words grow. If the atmosphere is tense, the words wither. If the atmosphere is relaxed and assured, the words take root naturally. This is why the most powerful inner declarations feel almost boring. They don't excite you because they don't contradict your sense of reality, they confirm it. And confirmation is what the subconscious accepts most easily. When you internally repeat a statement like, money comes to me easily and repeatedly, with calm assurance, you are not trying to convince yourself, you are reminding yourself of what you have already accepted as true. That reminder strengthens the assumption. Over time, the feeling of certainty becomes automatic. You no longer have to generate it, it arises on its own. This is the point where repetition shifts from practice to identity. The inner state becomes so familiar that doubt feels foreign. This is the state from which consistent results flow. People often ask how to feel it real. But the answer is simpler than expected. Stop trying to feel and start allowing. Allow the words to be true. Allow them to settle. Allow yourself to stop checking. The moment you stop monitoring for results, you signal trust. Trust is the purest form of feeling. It says, this is done. And what is done must express itself. The feeling that gives words power is not excitement, it is relief. Relief that you no longer have to chase, prove, or force anything. Relief that the inner decision has been made. When relief is present, the mind is open, and the subconscious is receptive. This is why inner declarations spoken at rest, before sleep, during quiet moments, or in relaxed awareness, are so effective. In those moments, resistance is low and acceptance is high. Feeling then flows effortlessly into the words. Another mistake people make is trying to use emotion to overpower doubt. This creates inner conflict. Conflict weakens creation. You do not defeat doubt with emotion. You dissolve it with repetition and calm. Doubt fades when it is no longer entertained. When a doubtful thought appears, you do not argue with it. You simply return to your chosen inner statement with neutrality. Over time, the doubt loses momentum because it is no longer being fed with attention. Attention is energy. What you attend to grows. Feeling grows where attention rests. If attention rests on certainty, certainty expands. If attention rests on fear, fear multiplies. This is why discipline of attention is more important than discipline of emotion. Emotions will follow attention naturally. As your attention repeatedly rests on the fulfilled state, your emotional baseline shifts. You feel safer. You feel steadier. You feel less reactive. That emotional stability is not a side effect. It is evidence that the inner state has changed. And when the inner state changes, the outer world must respond. Money begins to show up not in dramatic explosions, but in steady confirmations. A payment clears sooner than expected. An opportunity appears without effort. A decision made earlier yields unexpected returns. These events feel natural because they match your inner feeling. That is how you know the words are working. Power feels normal. Struggle feels dramatic. If you find yourself constantly hyping yourself up, you are still trying to override disbelief. Instead, soften. Lower the volume. Let your inner declaration feel like a fact you don't need to defend. Facts do not argue, they simply are. The feeling of being financially supported, stable, and provided for does not shout, it whispers. And whispers are often more persuasive than noise. This is also why impatience delays results. Impatience is a feeling, and it communicates that something is missing. When you feel impatient, you are affirming absence. Replace impatience with calm expectancy. Expectancy says, it is on its way because it already exists in my inner world. That feeling keeps the channel open. The warning here is important. Do not confuse lack of emotional intensity with lack of power. The quietest assumptions are often the strongest. When your words feel natural and your feeling is settled, you have reached the creative state. From there, you do not need to do more. You simply continue being loyal to that inner feeling. And loyalty to the fulfilled feeling ensures that your words are not empty. They are alive, active, and effective. Money responds to this state because it responds to coherence. Inner belief and outer experience must align. When your words and feeling agree, reality has no choice but to follow. Identity precedes income. Become the one who naturally receives. Money never chases effort, it follows identity. And until this is understood, people will continue trying to earn what can only be allowed. Identity is not your job, your background, or your current bank balance. It is the quiet answer you give to the question, who am I in relation to money? That answer, whether spoken or unspoken, governs every financial experience you have. Long before income increases, identity shifts. Long before opportunities appear, permission is granted inwardly. People try to change income by changing circumstances, but circumstances are effects, not causes. The cause is always the self-concept you live from. When you identify as someone who struggles, life gives you challenges to justify that identity. When you identify as someone who receives easily, life supplies channels for receiving. This is not favoritism, it is consistency. Reality is loyal to who you believe you are. Identity is formed through repetition of inner claims. Every time you say, think, or imply something about yourself, you are reinforcing a role. Most people unconsciously repeat identities inherited from past experiences. I'm not good with money. I always start over. I earn but can't keep. Money comes hard for me. These statements are not observations, they are contracts. Life must honor them because you keep signing them mentally. To change income, you must renegotiate identity. And identity changes not through force, but through familiarization. You familiarize yourself with a new version of you until it feels like home. That is what repetition does. When you consistently repeat an inner declaration that implies wealth, stability, and ease, you are not lying, you are rehearsing your future self until it becomes your present self. Over time, the new identity begins to feel more natural than the old one. When that happens, behavior changes effortlessly. You make better decisions without overthinking. You stop sabotaging opportunities. You stop tolerating situations that contradict your worth. This is not willpower, it is alignment. Identity sets boundaries. When your identity shifts, your tolerance shifts. You no longer accept lack because it feels out of character. Money responds to this self-respect. Income grows when self-concept expands. This is why sudden wealth often disappears for those whose identity has not caught up to it. The money leaves because it does not match the inner image. Consistency requires congruence. When identity and income match, money stays, grows, and multiplies. Becoming the one who naturally receives does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming receptive. Receptivity is a state, not an action. It is the inner permission to have without guilt, fear, or disbelief. Many people block money not because they don't want it, but because they don't feel safe having it. Their identity is still tied to struggle, sacrifice, or survival. When you change identity, you release these internal conflicts. Money then becomes neutral, supportive, and predictable. The shift is subtle but profound. You stop seeing money as something you chase and start seeing it as something that circulates through you. Circulation implies flow. Flow requires openness. Identity determines openness. When you identify as abundant, you expect circulation. When you expect circulation, you allow movement, and movement brings increase. This is why wealthy states of mind are relaxed. Tension constricts, relaxation expands. Identity also shapes how others respond to you. People sense who you believe yourself to be. Opportunities come through people, systems, and timing, but all of them respond to your self-concept. When you carry yourself as someone who expects success, others trust you more, invest in you more, and offer you more. Not because you demand it, but because expectation is contagious. Your inner certainty creates outer confidence. That confidence opens doors. This is not manipulation, it is resonance. Like attracts like. Stable identity attracts stable income. Most people think they need proof to change identity. In truth, identity must change before proof can appear. Waiting for proof keeps you stuck. You must decide who you are before the world can agree with you. This decision is not dramatic. It is quiet and private. It happens in the moments when you choose what to say to yourself. Every time you repeat a sentence that implies, I am provided for, I am supported, I am successful, you are strengthening a new identity. At first, it may feel unfamiliar. That does not mean it is wrong, it means it is new. Stay with it. Familiarity will come, and when it does, income will adjust automatically. The warning here is essential. Do not try to act wealthy while thinking poor. That creates inner conflict. Instead, think wealthy and let action follow naturally. True identity change is invisible at first. It shows up as peace, as confidence, as lack of urgency. These are signs that the inner shift has taken root. From this state, money begins to show up consistently, often through ordinary channels that feel surprisingly easy. Ease is the signature of alignment. When income feels forced, identity is lagging. When income feels natural, identity is leading. Become the one who naturally receives, and receiving will no longer feel like an event, it will feel like a lifestyle. Persistence neutralizes doubt. Why staying loyal to the inner decision changes everything. Persistence is not about repeating words louder, longer, or with more effort. It is about staying loyal to an inner decision regardless of appearances. Most people misunderstand persistence and turn it into pressure. But true persistence is calm, steady, and unshaken. It is the quiet refusal to accept a story that contradicts what you have already decided to be true within yourself. Doubt does not disappear because you fight it. It disappears because you stop agreeing with it. And agreement is always expressed through repetition. Whatever you keep returning to inwardly becomes dominant. Persistence simply means you keep returning to the same fulfilled conclusion until it feels more natural than questioning. When you do this, doubt loses its fuel. Doubt feeds on attention. When attention is withdrawn, doubt weakens. This is why persistence works even when nothing seems to be happening outside. The outer world is always the last to change. The inner world moves first, and it moves quietly. Persistence ensures that the inner change is completed before you judge the outer delay. Many people quit too soon, not because the law failed, but because they mistook silence for failure. Silence is often the sign that reorganization is underway. The world does not announce its shifts in advance. It reveals them after alignment has stabilized. Persistence stabilizes alignment. When you persist in your inner assumption, you stop being emotionally reactive to circumstances. You no longer swing between hope and disappointment. That emotional steadiness is not indifference, it is confidence. Confidence says, this is done, so I don't need to check. Checking implies doubt. Trust implies completion. Persistence builds trust. Over time, your nervous system relaxes because it no longer feels the need to protect you from uncertainty. That relaxation opens the subconscious, making it more receptive to your repeated inner claims. This is why persistence feels easier over time, not harder. At first, you may have to remind yourself intentionally. Later, the assumption runs on autopilot. That is when it becomes powerful. Autopilot belief creates autopilot results. People often think persistence means ignoring reality. It does not. It means interpreting reality differently. Instead of seeing delay as denial, you see it as adjustment. Instead of seeing obstacles as signs to stop, you see them as rearrangements. Your interpretation determines your emotional response. Your emotional response determines whether you persist or quit. Persistence is easier when you remove emotional drama. Drama exhausts. Neutrality endures. The most effective persistence is almost boring. You simply return to your inner decision without reaction. This neutrality confuses the old patterns. They expect resistance or fear. When they receive calm certainty instead, they collapse. Money patterns are no different. If you persist in the assumption of abundance, lack patterns cannot survive. They require your agreement. When you withdraw that agreement consistently, they dissolve. This is why persistence is described as loyalty. You are loyal to your chosen inner truth, not to circumstances, not to past evidence, and not to other people's opinions. Loyalty creates integrity. Integrity aligns your inner world, and an aligned inner world produces aligned outer results. Money begins to show up more consistently when your persistence removes emotional volatility. Volatility repels stability. Persistence creates predictability. Predictability attracts flow. This is why consistent income follows consistent self-concept. Every time you persist through a moment of doubt without reacting, you strengthen your new state. Those moments are not setbacks, they are tests of identity. Each time you choose your assumption over appearances, you pass the test. Passing tests builds confidence. Confidence deepens belief. Belief hardens into fact. The process is simple but not always easy in the beginning. But ease comes with practice. Persistence is practice. Practice makes identity. Identity makes results. Another crucial point: persistence is not time-based. It is state-based. You do not persist until a certain date. You persist until the assumption feels normal. Normality is the finish line. Once the assumption is normal, results follow naturally, often rapidly. The outer world loves normal. It resists the unfamiliar but reflects the familiar. This is why sudden breakthroughs often happen after a long period of apparent stillness. The stillness was normalization. The breakthrough is reflection. The warning here is subtle. Do not measure your persistence by how long you've been repeating words, but by how quickly you return to certainty after doubt appears. The shorter that gap becomes, the stronger your persistence. Eventually, the gap disappears. Certainty becomes your default. From that point, money does not just appear, it stays. Because staying requires stability. Stability is built through persistence. When you are no longer emotionally moved by temporary fluctuations, you have mastered the state. Mastery is calm, mastery is quiet, mastery is patient, and mastery is rewarded with consistency. Stay loyal to the inner decision. Not aggressively, not anxiously, calmly, gently, repeatedly. Because what you persist in internally must eventually solidify externally. And when it does, it will feel so natural that you will wonder why it ever felt difficult at all.